Well, Steffi gets a lot of credit for putting on a pretty great conference. So I wanted to start by asking you all, when you think about the climate crisis, how many of you routinely think about soil?
No.
Oh, a fairly erudite crowd, but still a relatively small percentage. Okay, we hope that by the end of this session that will change, because that's really what we're here to do. We're going to start listening to Jan, who is really a regeneration expert and really a passionate thinker on this topic. He's going to give a few thoughts, and then we're going to have a discussion. So Jan, take it away.
Welcome. I know that all of you in this room are deeply concerned about the stage of our natural living system, and that you can feel that the tipping points are coming closer and closer. And we all know that it is our way of living, the way our economy and the way our societies are functioning, that are responsible for the stage of Mother Nature. And I'm using this expression, Mother Nature, consciously, as she provides our food, our shelter, and all we need to live. And I know that while many of us feel deeply separated from her, all of us are longing to reconnect to her. But how do we do that? And why are we in this stage of separation? For that, I would like to explain to you through a few principles how Mother Nature actually works. And the first thing you need to understand is Mother Nature is emergent. It is self-organizing, it is self-regulating, it is adaptive, it is highly dynamic. It evolves from the simple to the complex, which is actually the counterforce to entropy, which we call syntropy. It's this evolving of complexity that actually holds everything together. And the biosphere is deeply connected. It's an interdependent web of life. And it's important to understand this interconnectedness of this living ecosystem. And the second principle is that nature is collaborative. If you take the symbiosis of a plant and the soil, the plant is generating sugar through photosynthesis, and it is giving 40% of this photosynthesis, of this sugar, to the soil life, and it's feeding the soil life. And it's this, what we call the carbon cycle, that is actually generating life on this planet. And it is important to understand that the animals who are pruning the grass or the plants are kind of kickstarting again the photosynthetic process and thereby the dynamic of the living system. So it's an endless number of symbioses that are driving this system. And Mother Nature is diverse. We have 8 million species on this planet, and it's an amazing web that is basically causing the resilience of the system. And it's this what is basically driving everything on this planet, and we are part of it. We came out of it. Now let's have a look how we have been running our system, how we have been running our economic system. We actually have a mechanical view of life. We think we can manipulate life. We think we can actually fix life. We can re-engineer life. So we are completely opposite to the web of life, the emergence of life that we see. We think that competition is driving progress. We don't see that it's actually collaboration which is driving progress, but we feel that. We think that we are smart by running nature as a monoculture. Just for you to understand, what is a monoculture? Monoculture, if you have a monoculture of corn, you have a lot of space between the corn. Now this space is filled by plants because they want to cover the soil. If we don't cover the soil, it's like a wound. If we tear off the plants from the soil, we're tearing off our skin. And it is these plants, which we call weeds, which are kind of interfering with our industrial process of planting plants. And we try to kill these plants through pesticides. And these pesticides are antibiotics, and they're killing the soil life and the bacteria in the soil. And that's why our soils are deteriorating. So and the last thing we do, nature is circular. Everything that nature produces and that is fading away is again the basis for life to reoccur. But we have a linear system. We're actually producing something, we take something out of nature, we produce something, and then we put it into waste. And it is this linear system which is causing all the trouble. We only recycle 30% of all the material that we use for our products and for our living, and those are all being downcycled, so we are not actually maintaining the level of these products. So what you see here is that we are basically totally opposite to the living principles of life. And it is this separation which is causing our natural system to decline. Our economy is a highly extractive economy. And what we need to do is to overcome that. And how do we overcome that? Well, we go towards a regenerative economy. A regenerative economy is an economy that actually lives and produces to regenerate life. And that is creating the value in a regenerative economy. And how do we start? Where do we start? And that's where the title of our panel is coming from. We start with the soil. And why do we start with the soil? 95% of our food, of all that we use for living and that also the animals are using, is coming from the soil. And we have depleted these soils. 50% of the humus in our soils is gone. It's up there. Nobody talks about it, but 20 to 30% of the carbon dioxide that we have in the atmosphere is actually coming from depleting the soils and not from burning fossil fuels. Now, why are soils so important? There's a direct correlation between the level of humus in our soils and the nutrient density in our food. So the more humus we have in the soil, the better is our food. We are starving because our food has been depleted. There's no nutrient in our food anymore. And how do we get it back there? By getting this carbon back into the soil. And how is that happening? Through the symbiosis of plants and soil. And the last thing that you need to understand is the more humus we have in the soil, the more water the soil can store. And the more water the soil can store, the more resilient is the system. And the infiltration of the water into the soil increases dramatically if we have more humus in the soil. So there is the direct correlation to all these positive impacts that soil can contribute. But with our industrial monoculture agricultural system, we are destroying the soil. Now the good news is we have all the solutions to move to a regenerative economy. We have regenerative agriculture, which is actually following the principles of life. It's a business model where a farmer is actually working according to these principles. We have the ideas of a circular economy. We know how to solve these things, but we need to do it. We need to move to a new system, because otherwise we will fail. Our current extractive economy is simply destroying us. And the solution is there, and that's the good news. We just need to implement it. There are regenerative farmers. They are still considered to be a very small minority. They are working with diversity. They are working with systems that are actually in line with these natural principles I just tried to explain. And that's what we need to move towards. And that's what our panel will be discussing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. That's not the way your typical VC talks, by the way. So he's an outlier in a good way. And this issue of agriculture as a massive global force that could be turned into a tool for tremendous progress is not only the theme of this session, but the one immediately following, which I also will have the privilege of moderating, which is going to go a little more deep into some technology solutions that might help with soil and climate. Sandrine Dixon-Declève is the co-president of the Club of Rome. I want you to maybe comment on what you heard from Jan just now. But first, tell us what the Club of Rome is so that everybody has that clearly in their head.
So thank you, Jan, first of all, for setting the scene. It was beautifully done, really. I don't think that I actually need to be here anymore because you've summarized the importance of living systems. An importance which was highlighted in the original book published by the Club of Rome already 50 years ago, The Limits to Growth. And as you so clearly said, Jan, in The Limits to Growth, it was very clearly outlined in a variety of different scenarios that if we continued with an extractive economy, which did not take into consideration neither soil nor the planetary boundaries, that we would continue to go beyond that economy and our planetary boundaries and do two things. As population grew, actually wealth distribution would decrease. And in the same way, our impact on natural boundaries would have such a ricochet effect that we would see a series of tipping points. Now, fast forward to the 2020s, where we are. And actually, if you go back to every single one of the diagrams and the scenarios of the limits to growth, I know here in Germany, luckily, many of you know about the limits to growth, but in many parts of the world, the book was not read. But looking at those diagrams, what do we see? Well, we see that actually those tipping points are going to create compound effects between social tipping points and environmental tipping points. And that's happening right now, if you look at the 3 Cs, right? Climate, COVID, and conflict. So why is it so important that the Club of Rome continues to pursue on its message? Because actually, for some reason, humanity continues to create its own greatest existential risk, thinking that actually production and extraction is going to continue to generate either wealth or well-being, which it doesn't. And today, we are living the constant tipping points that we actually predicted already 50 years ago. We've moved now from a thought process that not only addresses sustainability and the SDGs, which are so fundamental and you're wearing the pin, but to think through back to what then do we do with regenerative thinking, which is that living systems approach. Understand the importance of soil, coming back to valuing what is most essential. Here in a conference where we're talking about digitalization and the importance of digitalization, how can we translate digitalization, satellite photography, or even an understanding of technology in its broadest sense to service people, planet, and prosperity, and to bring us back to the essence of the earth? So I'll finish with, I think we are at a time now where we understand, and I hope we all understand, that we're in a deep malaise. COVID woke us up to lives and livelihoods were more important than actually just the profit motive or the dollar sign. Survival now is dependent on the most vulnerable link, and therefore climate impacts are going to hit us, as well as value chain impacts, if we don't come back to understanding what is the underpinning of our economy. As you very clearly said, 25% of our emissions are coming from agriculture. Our forests are being decimated by agriculture. #1 cause of deforestation is agriculture. And our people, malnourishment, both in terms of obesity and not enough access to food, is the #1 cause of death across the globe. So if we don't come back to soil and what is most essential for our lives, we have truly not understood the way in which we're going to get out of the mess in the 21st century that we've created ourselves.
Really good. Really quick before we go to Stefan, as we were prepping for this, you used the phrase Ubuntu and said it was deeply relevant. Tell us what that is and why it's relevant.
Well, it's a shame also, by the way, that we have 4 Western people on this stage, because I think we need to go back to indigenous knowledge and those who really understand the value of the soil and the value of earth. We should have mixed the previous
It's hard to
around
program
leapfrogging.
conferences,
I know,
but go
and
ahead.
it's not Steffi's fault, by the way, if Steffi's here, or anyone else's, because it is difficult. Ubuntu knowledge is you are because we are, or you are because I am. We are all interconnected, and the whole idea that we are connected not just as human species, but all species. So this comes back to your very good point. And I think that's what we need to get back to in terms of the philosophy of today. Living systems, Ubuntu philosophy, understanding that an unhealthy earth means unhealthy people, and probably our own demise.
Thank you. Well, I think you've probably picked up that you're looking at 4 people who think we have a grave crisis that we all have to turn our attention to with great vigilance and urgency. And to underscore that further, Stefan, who's really a connector in this whole arena, he's an expert in soil. He worked for the United Nations Environment Program for almost 20 years. He's organizing conferences, working with Jan. But he really is good at explaining why the soil and nature matters. So tell us a little bit about why we're up here today, Stefan.
Yes, I would like to extend the importance of soil to vegetation, and they're really interlinked. Imagine you're going out on a hot summer day for a stroll. It's 35 degrees outside, temperature, it's really hot. You're going onto an agricultural field, a large field which has recently been harvested and plowed. It's really getting hot there. Soil temperatures can be 60 or even 70 degrees, so creating really hot air there. If you haven't sweated yet, you will sweat there for sure. Now, you see a forest nearby, and you go towards this forest. What happens when you enter the forest? Just try to feel it. There's a clear difference. The temperature there is much lower, probably 15 or 20, 25 degrees lower than we had it before on the agricultural field. It's humid air, it's damp, and it smells very good as well. So what is the difference? Why is there this difference? Actually, trees do the same thing that we do when it's getting warm. We sweat, they transpire. That transpiration is immense. A large tree in summertime can transpire 400 or 500 liters of water. In the tropics, even 1,000 liters of water. That's an incredible amount. But what is really interesting is that for the transpiration process to proceed, to succeed, you need energy. And the tree sucks, so to say, the energy from the surrounding area. And it translates, these 500 liters translate to a cooling capacity of around 10 household air conditioners running for 24 hours full.
Per tree?
Per tree, 24 hours running. So the tree cools the environment, the surrounding area, and you can feel it if you're in the beer garden somewhere under a tree. Cools in the environment with these 10 air conditioners running full time. Now imagine you have this process where finally water vapor goes into the air. You have it in the trees, and there are billions and billions and billions of green geysers pushing this water into the air while cooling the environment. So it is nice to know about the cooling power of the trees, or vegetation in general, but trees are more powerful there. But it doesn't stop there, because the humidity going into the air creates clouds. Clouds are perfect reflectors of incoming sunlight, which again cools the air, because it doesn't penetrate up to the soil to heat it up. And then it's building clouds. And the amount of energy which was used at the ground finally can be freed up there. Part of it can dissipate into outer space, again cooling the environment. So there are multiple benefits of having vegetation. But when you look out into in Germany or in the States, large areas have been deforested. There's agriculture, there's urban sprawling everywhere, so there's heat production instead of climate cooling.
But just make sure you underscore where rain comes from. It comes very largely from plants, right? That's something most of us don't think about enough.
Yeah, actually, when you look in Munich, for example, there's like 50% of the rain coming from the oceans, which means 50% is coming from the land, and they're like 80% from vegetation. The further you go to the east in Europe, for example, eastern China, for example, 80 to 90% of that rain stems from the land, and it actually comes from Europe, because there's this recycling process happening dozens of times until it arrives there. So if we don't have that vegetation transpiring and putting this humidity in the air, they, in this case, don't have the rain.
Okay, Jan, why are you, as a VC, so concerned about this issue?
Why am I concerned as a VC?
Well, not as a VC, but you are a VC, and why are you concerned?
I'm concerned as a homo economicus, because we are just not getting the numbers right. Just to give you an idea, as we already discussed, the nutritiousness of our food is depending on the humus in the soil, the level of humus. Now, we are spending in Europe 200 million euros just for diabetes 2. Now, diabetes 2 is not the diabetes you have because of a gene effect or because of age. It's the one that is actually originating from just eating shitty food. And 200 billion in relation to subsidies for farming of 50 billion. Now, our health system in Germany, just 40% of that health system, which is tons of billions, is going into chronic food-based diseases. So we are just not getting the math. If we would invest in putting back what needs to get back into the soil, by the way, it's carbon, which we would by that way also subtract, it's the carbon we want to get rid of, we would actually solve so many issues. And that's something that I'm very concerned about. Another thing that is kind of preventing us moving there, you know, there's always this discussion if regenerative agriculture, for example, can produce all this food in the world that we need. It can actually produce much, much more, because we are maximizing photosynthesis through regenerative agriculture, which we are not doing with our conventional system. So don't worry about feeding the world. But the problem is, it is of course a more complex way, it needs more people, and we have at the moment, or since hundreds of years, we have an accounting system where we do not account for the externalities that are caused by our industrial system. We are externalizing these expenses on society. And what I just mentioned about the enormous expense for health, that's an externality that is caused by something where the person who is causing it doesn't need to account for it. And we need to create a plain level field for all the economic players so that sustainability or regenerative practices actually pay off. And once we do that, I promise you, we will see an explosion of innovation. Yeah. And we will need a lot of technology, of course, for it, but technology with the right intention. Technology is not the solution, it's a tool. And that's what I'm saying as a VC. Yeah. And once we get that, then the system will change. And we're really 2 minutes before 12. We need to get going. And there is a great opportunity. You know, we're always saying we need to sustain what is there. No, we need to regenerate it, because if we sustain what is there, there's the so-called baseline effect. We're talking about, some people are estimating that we destroyed 90% of our life on this planet already. Yeah. So, sorry.
That was excellent. Just a second. So, one of the things that Jan just underscored for me is so critical, and I don't think most people get it yet, and it's something that I'm very eager to try to explain more. If we take the actions that we need to take on climate, we can generate enormous economic activity. We can create market success. We can grow the economy and create a more sustainable world. It isn't like we're gonna compromise and, degrowth ourselves. No, we can have growth with sustainability and be solving the problem at the same time. So that to me is really important for people to understand and not get dejected and throw up their hands, as so many Americans are doing now, and feeling like it's too late. It's like party till we die. You were going to say something, so I won't even ask you a question. Go ahead.
Can we please just redefine growth? And
Redefine growth, right?
Yes,
thank you.
because growth how? Growth what? Growth for whom?
Right.
First of all, Jan, absolutely correct. It is the fact that we're not doing the numbers because also many people don't want us to do the numbers. Let's be very clear. The power mongering and the arrogance of so many.
In particular, who?
Well, in particular, Big Ag, who are continuing to deforest, and for example, in Brazil, Bolsonaro, who has continued to allow the Big Ag to deforest on the back of not only people, indigenous people in Brazil itself, but also the smallholders and the entire globe, because we're losing the lungs of the world, which means we need to pay for. But I didn't want to go down that route because that gets very complicated. What I did want to say is very clearly, this calls for a revolution. And that's exactly what we say in Earth for All, a Survival Guide for Humanity. And an exciting revolution.
Exactly.
One that we can all be part of and prove that we're not idiots. Because right now, we're just sitting there watching ourselves commit bloody suicide.
Yeah.
We're collectively committing suicide, people, because we've allowed for the monetary value, not costing the externalities, to dictate what actually is not true value. Go back to Bob Kennedy's speech in 1968, where he says we don't place a value on what truly matters. Why the hell has it taken us 50 years to realize that? Because now we're facing the fact that not costing those externalities are costing our lives, health-wise, and also in terms of the climate. So how do we do that? In this book, very clearly, we can absolutely revolutionize agriculture. We have to localize agriculture. Localize so that we can actually get food to the people who need it, to make it healthier, to decrease trade deficits, to ensure that we have the right debt calculation. I mean, that gets big, right? It starts to really shake things up in terms of our economy. Then we need to think about our health, which comes back to what the hell are we eating? And come back to the soil we do. Once again, what are the nutrients in the soil? We do need lab-based foods, by the way. Technology in that area is great, but at the end of the day, we will need to come back to making sure that we don't deprive ourselves of soil-based foods.
Thank you.
And what that actually means. And we can do it. We're seeing huge parts of the United States already totally transform. We were talking about India. There are so many good examples.
Yeah.
Third point, we need to optimize. Systems is about optimization. We have become so damn lazy. The wastage in our food system is ridiculous while people are going starving. And that is creating emissions too. And we've got the solutions for that as well. So this is all a bunch of positive knock-on effects. Yeah. If we are smart, if we stand up to the plate, and if we remember Ubuntu philosophy, where we realize get away from the ego, back to the eco, away from the me, back to the we.
Nice. Okay, we've got 1 minute and 46 seconds, and I want to hear from Stefan too, but you wanted to say something.
I want to say one word on growth. Do you really think that our economy is growing? If we would introduce a natural capital account and account for what we are extracting against what we are growing on the other end, we would have tremendous negative growth. We are in a downward spiral.
Again, we're not counting the externalities.
We just don't get it.
Yeah.
And if I may just say one little word, because this gentleman is very modest. What he is describing is the solution to the climate change. 80% of the climate is driven by water. We are focusing on carbon dioxide, which we need to, because we need to get it back into the ground to revive our soils. But once we do that through diversity. We actually kick in the cooling system of this planet. And we're just not getting it. We're trying to build big apparatus to catch carbon dioxide, which have no impact. And I would love you to talk a little bit about that as well.
Use your 40 seconds wisely. Go ahead.
Exactly. It's only one sentence principle, which leads me to the saying we have to work with nature and not against it. Yeah? If nature is the key for the solution for our future, for the future of our grandchildren. So we have really to learn from nature, understand how it works, and sustain it to help it grow, to regenerate. So for me, it's as well a paradigm shift which we need from sustainability away to regeneration, and that is something we only can do with nature and not against it.
David, can I just make one last remark? I'll use 7 seconds. Number one, adaptation, fundamental. We've only talked about mitigation and we haven't really talked about it. That's exactly what Stefan is talking about. It's those feedback loops. Look at California. Look at what's happening right now. That's a major bloody feedback loop. And the fact that they have actually cut down their own forests is why they're getting all the issues right now. So we have to remember, again, agriculture uses 70% water. Most of that is deforestation as well. Deforestation that actually creates those negative feedback loops, which means that we get the California effect multiplied in so many other countries, Pakistan and everywhere else. So this is not unsexy, okay? Most people think this is just poo-poo, it's not technology investment. This is super sexy because it is about us thriving.
Yeah, good. You know, one phrase that you really have to use all the time in this arena is systems. Systems thinking. If we don't have systems thinking, we're screwed. And what Jan is saying, if we price in the externalities, we realize the system actually isn't working now. And the final thought, I want to say this in every session I moderate, radical cooperation is indispensable to where we go from here, and that is part of systems thinking. We have to cooperate and have a systemic way of acting as a human race. So thank you so much. I think it was a good panel.